Welcome to the Return to Roots Mil2Vet podcast, your guide through the journey from military to veterans in the community. This podcast is dedicated to service members, veterans, and their families. Get ready for inspirational stories and experiences generously shared by our amazing guests. Stand by for the sound of freedom. Before we dive into today's episode, we want to remind you of two essential resources, the 988 National Hotline for Mental Health Support and the MYTT 365 app available at mil2vet.com. Both are valuable tools to assist you in your transition journey. Now let's get to the show.
Return to Roots. Welcome. Today we're bringing you a retired Command Master Chief with a lot of wealth of experience. He was in the Navy for 30 years, and now he's transitioning and serving in the Washington, D.C. area. Without further ado.
The Navy, I'd say easy job with difficult circumstances. So being deployed, being away from your family, missing out a lot of life events, that stuff that don't get me wrong, that stuff's difficult. But the job itself, once you learn your skill and you learn kind of how things work and you learn preventive maintenance and you learn the rules and you learn leadership, I mean, that stuff is that stuff, because you do it every day. You don't even realize it. You stop sometime and say, and that's a trend. That's kind of the hard thing you do when you have to write a resume for the first time in the outside world. And you go back and look and you're like, man, a lot of my skill sets don't translate to the outside world. How am I going to word this? And then you just strip it down to basics and go back and say, okay, what is it that I really did? Well, I got trained on the Tomahawk weapon system, missile system. Is Amazon going to need that? Probably not. How do I say? I hope they don't need. You can probably get one on Amazon. You can get just about anything. But then you have to kind of break that down and say, okay, but what is it that I did with that system, and and that was for me. I probably went through, and I went right to work. So I retired and went right to work outside. And I know I'm on probably my 10th or 11th iteration of a resume. And the best advice I ever got was write a resume for the job that you're looking for, instead of just having it. A lot of guys I see will have just a blank resume, like blanket DoD style resume. But if you're going for a specific skill, you want to make sure that your resume speaks to that. And then it's up to you to kind of go back and look at your career and say, how do I dig out? I know I did something along these lines, but I can't really say if it's a technical thing that only applies to the Navy. How do I translate that into something that's going to be usable? So that was a pretty good learning experience for me. I mean, just the concept of, I think the first job I interviewed for was post Navy. I mean, I was a paper boy, worked at Taco Bell. It wasn't exactly a significant interview process for Taco Bell when I was in high school. So after coming out of the Navy, the first time I had an interview, I'm like, this is different. And then it was like, well, I did so I worked in the oil and gas industry for about a year after I first retired as a high risk consultant. And the interview was the big part of the interview was a 3 to 5 minute note card speech where they just give you a topic and see if you can, talk on the fly. And Chris, that I can talk out of my ass easily. Well, right. So I was like, oh, that's no problem. You gave me a topic and give me a few minutes to prepare. That's easy. And they're like, oh, wow, you really did well with this. So that was interesting. And then I moved on from that, did that for about a year, and then moved on to the job I'm in now, which ironically enough, still work for the Navy. And this is a really good lesson learned for people is don't burn bridges, because rolling out the door after 30 years in the Navy, I was like, see, never going to see the Navy. I love the Navy. It's been real, but bye. Year later, man, I'm interviewing for a DoD contractor job in DC. And I'm just like, why am I back? Here I am again, and back getting a CAT card and going back on base. And I'm like, all this stuff I swore out, regulation training, like GMT and stuff. I still have to do that stuff. All the stuff that I swore off, literally like on the way out, like, oh, I'll never have to do all this again. And here my dumbass is, sitting down doing it again every year. So don't burn your bridges on that. But interesting to see the difference between how we structure things leadership wise in the Navy and then what's out there really in the civilian world.
That's pretty awesome, man. Everything you just said rings so true.
Yeah.
My name's Mark. I've been retired.
Hey, Mark. Good to meet you, man.
Good to meet you, sir. I've been retired for 12 years and 2 months. I got out at 20, and man, it's been civilian life ever since. And now the military is just a distant memory.
Yes. Yes.
Everything that you said about, trying to apply all of your skills to the outside world.
Yeah.
Yeah. None of that stuff really flies out here.
Yeah. It's interesting, especially now because when I first joined the Navy, people would get out and nobody had any idea what we did especially in the Navy, because the Navy's pretty unique with that stuff. So now though, potential employers know to look at they know what a DD-214 is. They know what to look for. They understand what your RE code is. They know what your awards are. They know what your NECs are. I mean, it's pretty impressive. Like when I interviewed for the job I'm in now, they were like, oh, I see you were a this, whatever NEC they talked about. And I was like, oh, you actually know what that is. That's impressive. So they've got a lot more savvy on that. But again, it's one of those things where you got to look at yourself and say, what do I want to present myself on the outside? And I think the biggest thing for me was I had to force myself to leave the Navy at the door. I couldn't transition I couldn't stay the same person that I was in the Navy, because I had to have a cold break. I really did. And I was in a couple of obviously high stress jobs towards the end of my career as I moved up the ladder. But you can't walk into an organization and say, well, I was this and this, and I demand, and I still see it. It's crazy. We'll be on a call, a Teams call or a Zoom or something within my peripheral now, and there's still people that are like, well, when I was in the Navy and I did this, and I'm just like, yeah.
No.
So there's a difference between experience and corporate knowledge and being a subject matter expert and wearing that on your shoulder and still expecting people. And I still get it. So I still have to go. I'm out here in Colorado Springs, so I actually go to an Army base for my, like my CAT cards and my medical, my PCM is there and stuff. So, and it's taken 5 years, but I can finally go on base and not want to just pull over and just, pull my hair out and yell at somebody, because I'm just like, you know what? Somebody's going to take care of this. I'm retired. My blood pressure is pretty decent. I already did this. I did this for 3 decades. I need to let go. And I did that without retiring on active duty. The last 6 months I was in the Navy, while still very busy and traveling a lot and doing a leadership training, I made myself mentally get into the mindset that this wasn't going to be where I was forever. And that can be very difficult for people. I think it's a very legitimate challenge for people that had some perceived stature or leadership role and thought that they're all that. And then they get outside and it's like, if that's all you got to hang your hat on, then you didn't set yourself up well. So preparation prior to, which you guys know, and then really making yourself that transition. And you still have your uniforms hanging in the closet. You still have the pictures and the memories, but don't be dragging that around behind you. Don't be dragging it around. You got to let go, man. What's that Frozen movie? Let it go. You got to let it go. I have grandkids. That's the only reason I know that the Frozen movie. So
Yogi,
my granddaughter loves that.
We're doing karaoke now. All right. Go first. Let it go.
I get to watch it every time I visit my grandkids, which is pretty funny.
With that, you started talking about the transition part of it. What do you think was the best part, and how did you set yourself up the best as prior to and transitioning, right? And how early did you start?
Yeah, I started. So the long lead item for me was getting my degrees. I wanted to get my degrees before I knew that, I kind of figured at 25, 26 years, I kind of thought 30 would be enough for me. And sure enough, 30 came around and I was like ready to go. So the first thing I did was look at my skills and then think, I need to make myself marketable on the outside. And the biggest way to do that is get your degree. The big plus for me was the government's tuition assistance program. So that's something I pushed a lot. Chris probably remembers this on the ship, but doing something for yourself outside, doing education. The government's going to pay for you to go to school, and I would intentionally, if we were out at sea, I would leave my office open and I'd be in my office like late at night, and sailors would stop by and say, Master Chief, what are you working on? I'm like, I'm doing my college degree. And they're like, oh, I'm like, what are you doing? Heading to play Xbox? They're like, yeah. I'm like, yeah, get your degree, man. So a little bit of that was lead by example, but a lot of that really was me thinking that, Do I really have enough skills to translate over? And if the government's going to pay for me now, was it a burden? Sure. Was it hard? Yeah. Was there stuff I'd rather be doing? Of course. But the government going to pay to get my degree, and I'm just got to put in the work. I can do that. So that was kind of the first piece to answer your question there, Yogi, is started with that. And then, went through the usual personal health side, the VA process, going through and doing all the VA stuff, which was a pain, but I'm glad I did it because, again, this is one of those things that you look at and you don't necessarily, VA, medical benefits is one thing that's not really, well, what it does though, because it sets you up, if you get a, high enough rating, and it supplements your retirement, you can really not stress out enough about finding that perfect high paying job. And the other reality is you get out of the Navy, I got out of the Navy at 48. My job pool at 48 with my experience is totally different than at 24. So I needed to think about, my degrees in management. One of my degrees is management, which is pretty broad. That could be anything. And I was literally getting, when I got out, I got job offers, everything from financial to insurance, because it's just blanket management. So the VA process was important. And then the resume process was important. And then really understanding the transition and then what to look for. And I got some really good advice. When somebody told me the first job you get when you get out is probably not going to be the job that you stick in the rest of your life. And that was 100% accurate. So I think sometimes we have a tendency to jump at that opportunity. We get offered a job and they're interested and it kind of fits. And we're like, oh, wow, somebody actually likes me. Like, this is crazy. And I'm going to take it. And then after a year of doing that, I wasn't really happy. I was still going out 2 weeks at a time out to a oil and gas rig, which was a great experience, great group of guys to work with, trying to implement a safety culture in that. But being gone 2 weeks out of every month and coming back and trying to get reoriented just wasn't working. So I went back back towards the Navy. Ironically, a buddy of mine had an idea that I could get on with the company and went and did that. So I think that networking is incredibly important, using your resources. Don't think that you have to know everything yourself, because it's a little overwhelming. You're looking, you look 2 years out and you're like, I'm going to retire. What am I going to do with my life? It's a lot. So people that have got out before you that and collecting information, gathering as much information as possible is pretty important for sure. So kind of started with the self-education piece, made sure I was squared away medically, made sure that my records were all squared away, made sure everything was right in that. And then, again, a little bit of a learning curve with the interview process and going to offer yourself to a company. Whereas before it was really merit-based, or how well you did on an exam or how well your evaluations were. And all of a sudden you're in there in an interview room. I can't pull on my E5 evals when I'm trying to get a job in DC. They're like, hey, that's great. Glad that you were, DCPO. Good job, dude. We don't need that. What can you do for me now? So, tongue in cheek wise, knowing that how are you going to market yourself? And you have to allow yourself the time to do it. So sometimes retirement or transition can sneak up on you. Sometimes you may not have the ultimate say of when that happens. So if you have positive control of it and you have the ability to get out in front of it, that's the way to do it, is take your time, be methodical about it, and really kind of figure out what it is you want to do, which I think is incredibly important for anybody that's getting out.
Yeah, man. I really, going through my process, like the government or Congress mandated the transition class and stuff like that. And everybody says go to it 12 months before, but really you ought to be doing it 24 months out. The amount of information that's in there,
for sure,
is purely an information class.
Yeah, it is.
There's some things that you need to do before your year mark. And one of the best tools that I found while Yogi and I created this little project of ours, we found this tool that was down in San Diego, and it's called My Transition Timeline 365.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm doing is we've had this URL code that's always been right here in this corner whenever you watch the show.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes to this app, and it's custom to your setting. And then you also get a mentor that pretty much like pokes you like, hey man, how come you're not working on your stuff? And you get prompts. So this right here is showing my transition. I've been out. I've been out for 77 days. It wasn't 74, it was 77, right?
Shows your progress.
And I'm still not done with my transition because
this
tracks you even after you're out.
Yeah.
which is really awesome. Like this starts at 24 months out and then a year after. So that's 3 years. The transition really takes longer than what people understand. And having tools like what's right here in this URL, it's either my logo or it's that app, because it's such an important tool for people to track all the stuff
Absolutely.
that you're talking about, man. So
And it's, resources are important in reaching out, trying to be a sponge and soak up. Not all of it you're going to use. Not all, some of it you're going to find is not real helpful for your specific, case. And everyone's kind of a little bit different with what they want to do, what their skill sets are, what they're looking to go, where they're looking to go, what they're looking to do. So the more information you can gather, the better. And that's usually true about anything. Information rules. So you have to just collect information. But what happens if you wait is you pressurize yourself. When you pressurize yourself, that makes things really difficult on you because you start to feel that building up on you.
how did you go about getting your VA rating process? Did you use the BDD or did you use?
I think it was called a DAV. I was in San Diego at the time, so I was fortunate to be in a fleet concentration area where there's a lot of resources. And through my transition class, was hooked up with one of the people that you just bring them your record. I literally went and had my medical record printed and brought it to them, and they looked through. And they did all the legwork, which was super, super fun because I had a few things that I noted, and this guy went through mine and said, "Oh no, you had this and this, and that's a rating and that's a rating." So I went through, used a DAV, a counselor, and he's the one that actually reviewed my medical record and then kind of gave me the outline. I think I ended up having, I want to say, 7 different medical appointments,
Yeah.
to go through that process. But you have to do it because
A
they're not
lot.
going to sign off on it. Yeah, it's a lot. I don't like having one medical appointment, so for me to go to 7 was something. So, but that was what needed to happen in order to go through that process. And I completed my claim and had no gaps or anything. I got my benefits right away. Initially wasn't at 50%. I was initially, and this is something interesting. I got my initial rating at 40%, and without me doing anything, they went back and just did a periodic review, and they did that fuzzy VA math and ended up coming out at 50%. So within the first 6 months post retirement, I was at 50 and never looking back. And thankfully, they don't do anything. In my case, they didn't look at my mental state because I'd probably be at 100% coming out of the end of that career. So it's just physical stuff.
And do you regret not having them see or go through the mental health care stuff
I think
portion of
I
things?
think so, yeah, because I think that's one of those things that you kind of need the outside looking in, because you may think you're in the right space, and you deal with a lot. There's a lot of accumulation of, you think about it over the course of 30 out of the 48 years of my life at the time was spent in the Navy. I think 11 deployments, 17 years on sea duty, 7 different ships. I mean, that's regardless of what you're doing, that's a lot of time. It's a lot of stress. It's a lot of, you're handling a lot of things that you maybe didn't realize that accumulated on you. So I do think it's important for somebody to, you may think, oh, I'm fine, I feel good, I never had any issues, but you may go and get a professional to take a look at you, and I encourage that. I'm a huge proponent for ongoing mental health and therapy for sure, because I think there's some stigmas and misperception out there that therapy's for, issues or problems. No, sometimes you just need a third party that's neutral, that can talk to you, and you can kind of throw and vent to them, especially in a transition timeline where you're stressed out. If you have family to take care of and kids, and you don't want there to be any issues, I mean, that's a lot to carry around. So I think it's incredibly beneficial to have that, to definitely have that mental health piece too.
I fully agree with you on that part. Sometimes the scars and the wounds that we have are a lot deeper and a lot further, but if you don't have that outside perspective, that third party to allow you to see, because you're just used to it, you've been dealing with it for your whole life, or
Yeah.
as our military life, right? And then it just piles up, and we tend to just say that's not a problem right now, that's we'll just move it away, we'll move forward, keep
Yeah.
on going with life. And that's, I think it's a good thing that we do. It's a coping mechanism that we do just to get the process rolling. But at the end of the day, because we're not trained to or know that that is a very difficult and or toxic thing for our own body, it ends up hurting us. So I love that you're advocating for mental health.
Yeah, and it's easy for me because think without naming a name off the top of your head, think about somebody in your life that you've known that struggled with mental health. Certainly, people you served with, really incredible men and women that we served with. That I've lost quite a few people to mental health to struggles. Some really close friends, some people I knew with, people that we worked with. I mean, that's a hard thing to deal with, and you know, the worst thing is obviously the loss and the impact of the family. But then people was like, oh, they seemed like they were so happy. They seemed like they had it all together. They seemed like, all their Facebook posts just made it look like everything was awesome. It's like, well, people don't reveal their mental struggles the same way. Some people definitely suffer in silence. So, and I agree with you, Yogi, that having that outside looking in can be really important. And you may not even realize it, and it's, I had to teach myself. I wouldn't say I was tempered. I was always super laid back, but I thought that, I joined the era of the Navy where it was, yelling and screaming and firing brimstone and kicking and it worked, right? You didn't want to get yelled at. So, as I transition, as we move through the years, I learned that there's maybe more effective ways to get somebody's attention. Sometimes you have to do that. I don't know, Chris probably never even heard me yell, maybe unless it was during the CPO season, but that was totally staged. Uh, um, but I would save, like, if I came out of my boots, it would be a safety issue or an obvious, like, something's, we're going to do damage or we're going to hurt somebody. That's how I would say. Problem is, if you yell all the time, people tune you out.
Right.
You start yelling, humans just immediately turn the volume down and they don't hear what you're going to say. So you may feel better about it and you love yelling and screaming, but is that really about them or is it about you? So part of that is learning over the years too, is, that accumulates on you. And you're dealing with a lot, you're handling a lot. And maybe that person that they never showed any sign whatsoever, they suffered in silence. So
Yeah, I like how you really kind of pegged it in while you're transitioning. You should be getting someone to talk to.
yeah.
Whether you use one source or whether you tell your TRICARE provider, hey, I'm I'm dealing with separating from the military and I'm changing my identity, and that's kind of giving me some stressors. Even if you do that and then they write you referral out in town to go talk to somebody, that's a really important time. Even professionals, they call them life coaches or whatever you want to call them, and they're pretty much shrinks, the same thing. That they're psychologists, and they are literally helping you become better. So why wouldn't we want to do that for ourselves as well?
And certainly, the biggest barrier being a guy is it's just not it really isn't in our nature. And it's, we grew up and dad was always going to work and taking care of business and never complained and just handled his business. But, he was carrying around a lot of stuff too. And we may not even have realized it. So it's hard to be a male and admit that you want to talk to somebody. But then part of that too is that brotherhood and sisterhood of leaving the military, where you're like, I just want to show that I got all my ducks in a row. And it's hard to step forward. And I think, again, the stigma of not knowing what you're getting yourself into just to talk to somebody, that people have so many misconceptions about that you'd be surprised when you actually open that door and go and do it. And it may not solve your problems, but it'll certainly give you a different perspective. So I think it is important. I think it's really good for you to do that on your way out.
So what about the when you were getting out, you talked about how writing your resume was such a challenge, and did you use any programs or any like Hire Hero or whatever?
Yeah, I did. I did the Hired Heroes ultimately, and they did a really good job. My first few I did myself with use basically a template from somebody else that got out, and it's like, oh, here, you know how we do. It's like you need an instruction or you need something, just go get it from somebody else, right?
Well, there's
and
three original evals.
yeah, exactly. exactly. And I think that's helpful. But then again, if you're going to tailor your resume to what you want to do and what your skill set is, you got to be careful. So there's all kinds of schools of thought. Like my first resume was like 6 pages long. And I literally had quals going back to like I was a third class, and I was like, "This is ridiculous! Like, I don't need to condense this down to sale of the quarter certificate, have that on there. Like, who cares?" So I professionally, and I used Hire Heroes for that. And then I've kind of they gave me a really good working template, and I just kind of update it now and modernize. But I've been in the same gig now for 4 years, so I can adapt it if I want to. And there's different styles out there. If you like USA Jobs or some of those will tell you, you need to have a certain formatted kind of resume. So I think those things are trial and error. And I think it's worth having, because people need to understand a lot of that. Like most jobs, when they hire you, they're not reading your resume. They have a computer program that's reading that. So they're looking for keywords that are going to match up to what's in the job billet and the availability. So people get butthurt, like, oh, my resume was perfect, and they must have been at tears by the end of reading it. It's like they're getting 100 resumes for that one open position. They're not going to read every letter and word of your resume, so you better jump out and grab them. So how you format that and how you structure it can be super important for sure.
And with that, segueing into career transition and evals and resumes and stuff like that, right? I want to bring back something that you talked about earlier, and it's networking.
Mm-hmm.
First off, what is networking to you? What does that mean to you?
Oh, it's a good question. Friendship, resources, communication, knowing when you're up against the wall and you need somebody's help. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you want to just kind of plow your way through everything, but sometimes you may not know somebody that's going to help you, but you may know somebody that knows somebody that's going to help you. And that's that whole, the fruit of the tree kind of that, once you start pushing out, and then, how do you go about it? Do you just kind of like wait for somebody to help you? Or do you, I've seen people, I'm part of a group on Facebook called Combat Systems Jobs. And, I'm kind of a semi-recruiter for my company, because I've brought some people on board. So we'll get specific job requirements, and my HR people reach out and say, "Hey, go fishing for some talent." Well, I've seen some people in there that are doing it well, and they take a lot of flack. They're like, "Here's what I'm doing. Here's where I'm at. Can anybody help me? I'm willing to do this." And sometimes people are like, "Oh, you need to figure it out and prepare and do this," and that's part of it, is just putting on some thick skin and realizing that, hey, I've never done this before. I need some help. So use that resource. If you're a Facebooker, great. If you're a what's that? TikTok, whatever that thing is. If you're a TikToker, I'm old. If you're snack chatter, as we used to think it was called, snack chat, thought it was like a food delivery thing. It's not, actually an app. So it's Snap, not snack. Great. If you're Twitter, whatever it is, use your resources. But really, you interacted with so many people at so many different levels throughout your career that there's resources galore up there. And this goes back, and I said it earlier, don't burn your bridges, because I would do anything. Chris will tell you, man, I bend over backwards for sailors that were worth bending over backwards for. Of course, I'm going to protect them and take care of them and do what I can. But the ones that really left on good terms, whether it was 4 years or 24 years, there's nothing I wouldn't do for them. I'll write them a letter of reference. I'll talk to a company. I'll help them out. I know a lot of people. I'll try to get them connected where I can, so that keeping that process of don't burn in bridges is important too, because you want that extended network where if you put a feeler out there amongst people that you served with, people are immediately like, I want to help this guy out because he's good. He's good people. Or they say, oh, you know what? Yeah, no, sorry, never got your email, missed it, must have got on my spam folder. Don't burn your bridges. And that's part of that networking process, is to keep those. And I still keep in touch with people that go all the way back to my first ship, 35 years ago, still in touch, that I know for a fact that if I really needed them for something, they would be there for. So that's kind of how I see network is, you have that in place already. Especially as you get more senior, especially as you work your way up. I mean, there's people that get out and do some awesome things. I mean, I know doctors, I know people that are lawyers, I know people that are psychologists. I mean, there's people that have got out that I'm like, wow, they're not messing around. So there's a lot of resource out there. Stay connected to people and really, if there's value in that relationship when you reach out for help and they're willing to do, and they may have a much bigger fence than you do. So, you may have a limited scope of what you know and who you know, and that's fine. But some people out there are just like, they're like mayors, man. They know everybody, and those are good people to stay connected with because they have resources for sure. So that's, in a nutshell, that's kind of how I see network.
Adding to that, I'd like to say that getting any kind of next jobs or going forward with that network, right? It's not entirely about what you know, right? But it's about who you know.
Who you know.
And what I mean by that is also they open the door for you to meet people. They open the door, they already vouch for you, versus, as you said, applying through an application where not 150 people of those resumes are going to be seen. They're only going to see maybe 10% really, and actually that percentage is going to be viewed. So therefore, the 10%, if you already got your foot in that door, your resume is going to go to the top of that pile and it's going to be seen versus just pushed away. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's 100% accurate because the job I'm in now, I probably wouldn't have it if it wasn't for a former shipmate who happens to be my best friend, Donnie Novak, who got hired by that company, also retired command master chief, and he really liked the company. And he goes, "Hey, I know you've been doing this oil and gas thing," and I retired just about a year before him. So I was doing the oil and gas gig, which was super fun, super cool. It just kind of felt like that wasn't my long-term place. And he was already in place with this company I'm with now. He reached out and said, "Hey, they're drooling to talk to you, man. You'll fit a perfect skill." And it was an easy process. And without having him and knowing him and serving with him and him knowing, he knew my career inside and out, my skill set. So he's like, "Come up here and interview, man." It was a seamless process. So would I have got that opportunity without knowing him? No. So the network came through.
So one thing that you also mentioned was when you cut yourself up, not up, but off from the Navy.
Yeah.
And you mentioned like the last 6 months, you started realizing, really focusing on making sure that the next crew starts taking the mantle. And how hard was it to be kind of on your own when you cut it all off?
I literally was. So I was on a 2-man team doing a mobile leadership and training team for the PAC Fleet, CPO training team. And we traveled everywhere from the Mississippi West all the way across the Pacific to Japan and Guam. And we would go and do leadership seminars. Well, my partner got picked up for a job and he transferred. So literally while we were waiting for the new blood to come in the last few months, it was just me. And it was important to me. So this is where integrity kind of meets opportunity and planning. It was important for me to keep sustaining that one. And you can't, yes, you're preparing to transition. So it's a good question because how do you cut, but then you'd also have a responsibility. And I couldn't just say no to training opportunities. I still had to travel, which was a challenge because with all the VA appointments and everything else, that became a challenge because I was literally gone every week. So I had to squeeze in my appointments, but I also didn't want the fleet to suffer. And I never wanted anybody to say, we contacted the fleet CPO training team and they weren't available to come out. So that was incredibly important to me. But then in the back of your head, it's okay. But sooner or later, my retirement ceremony is going to be here. And I need to make sure and I think that was a perfect transition for me. I don't know if I would have left my last sea tour, Nimitz, I don't know if I wouldn't have been able to retire off of that tour because I was still super, super hyped up, still like energized, still like, really going to the wall, so to speak. So that last 2 years of being able to just teach leadership, and I hate to say teach, it was facilitating. That's that lovely Navy term we like to use, facilitating. Just makes you sound smarter, doesn't it? But basically just having really and having a lot of freedom to embed my own leadership traits and skills into what I was facilitating was super important. So that was a perfect transition for me. That's part of it. If you go from that, you're getting out from platoon sniper, in a special forces, and you're just going to retire out of that. That's a challenge. If you're going from working on the flight deck on an aircraft carrier or operating a submarine, whatever it is that you do that's high intensity operationally, especially, it's hard to come off of that and retire. It's nice, and it doesn't always work out that way for everybody. It's timing's everything, but to have that soft landing of being able to be on a mobile training team and go and spend my day with sailors and chiefs was pretty cool. So that helped significantly as well, for sure.
So you would say 2 years of the different transition into the slower paced job that allowed you to prepare for the actual slowing down into the civilian sector.
Absolutely. And there was a different kind of pacing. It was busy, but it wasn't you guys have been there, the operational, when you're building up for deployment or trying to get certified or going through, maintenance inspections or whatever it is that you're doing that, could be in-serve. Big picture things. You're all in, man. You're all dedicated to that. So this is a different thing. This is basically a lot of travel, but we were able to work out how we wanted to present our brief and really got very adept at it, and got a lot of great feedback on it because we were able to kind of morph it into what we wanted it to be. And that's important. So, yeah, I think that's exactly it, that I wasn't having to worry about, oh, man, we're getting underway for 3 weeks and I need to get all this done. And, oh, no, the deployment's coming up. And that's a whole different can of worms. So that having that non-operational commitment was for me was super important and allowed me to kind of transition the way I wanted to.
Yeah, being over at being over in Japan, like I have so many friends that are over there that are going to be retiring here soon or have retired out of there just recently. And it was not a very pleasant way for them to get out because
no, I can't imagine.
And out of 3 of them that I know that did, there's one that wasn't able to get his VA claim in, so he's still even almost 2 years now out. Still hasn't been able to get his VA claim because he didn't have the ability to file the claim because of deployment schedules, because of workups. And 5th Fleet AOR, man, that is just, you're turning and burning the entire time. So
that's timing is important. That's exactly it. It's, sometimes it works out. Sometimes you don't have a choice and things pop up and you get extended on deployment and it creates all kinds of ripples. But if you gotta, that's again, back to preparation. You got to kind of backtrack your career and think, okay, where I'm at in my career. I think I'm going to get out at this point. What do I need to do, including what orders I take and where I go and what I do in order to set myself up for that. If that falls into place, that really does make your transition a lot easier, for sure.
Yeah, and you may not be able to control like your orders at least, but you can at least have a plan to deviate from.
Sure.
And that's just like one of the things that's, hey, we know usually before we get out 24 months, usually we know that, hey, we're going to end up getting out.
Yeah, exactly. And you get to, I had a lot of conversations with people that were struggling with, well, what orders do I take next? And I'd always ask them, well, what do you want? Do you want more time with your family? Do you want to set yourself up for retirement? Do you want to be able to work on your degree, or do you want to advance? Like, what, you can't have it all. And I see that a lot where people are like, well, I want to make chief and I want to spend more time at home and I don't want to go to a deployment and I don't want to have to get my degree. It's like, well, you can't, like, you got to kind of really prioritize. That's where your hierarchy of needs kind of comes in, and you got to, what's the most important thing to you? So if it works out and you fall into that, you've got time to prepare, then you kind of set yourself up well, for sure.
I love that you've put in there the whole fact about your hierarchy of needs, right? If you don't even know what you need or what you are preparing yourself for, and you're just trying to go for everything, what is that saying? If you stand for nothing, you're going to fall for everything. Right. It's the same thing. If you're not preparing to do one thing and focus in your energy, you're just going to fall apart as you're trying to do everything burn the candle on both ends kind of thing.
You
And
gotta be
it
brutally honest. You got to be
yeah.
brutally honest with yourself. You really do. Because and I told people like, and I remember back when I was at a squadron for a few years as a command master chief, and I remember I was having a discussion. The first class that was trying to make chief, and just he couldn't make chief, and he just was very frustrated. And I looked at his evals, and I kind of pointed out why, and I told him, I said, well, here's what you need to do. Whether you want to hear it or not, I know you're happy in what you're doing, but you need and especially in his rating, I said, you need an operational tour. You need an operational tour. Well, I want to be around my kids. I'm like, okay, I think that's awesome. You should want to be around your kids, but sometimes you can't have it both. So that's why anytime anybody want to talk to me about a career decision, I'd say, you got to be willing to be brutally honest about what you want, because a lot of that you can't control. But if advancing is the most important thing to you, that's a different discussion that I would have than I'm trying to work-life balance, then I'm trying to set myself up for retirement. And I respect either angle. Like if you come to me and say, hey, I'm at 18 years, I'm not making chief, I'm getting out at 20, I'll continue to show up and do my job, but what do you see that I need to be doing? That's a much different discussion than a hot burning 11-year first class that's making chief that wants to be the next MCPON. You know what I mean? Like that's you pay us the Navy. That's a totally different conversation. Which I had a check-in. I had a brand new sailor on Nimitz. Go figure. Check in. I'm like, what's your career goal? I want to be the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy. Okay, cool. Like 18 years old, you already know where you want to be. That's awesome. And that's a very different discussion than somebody that's like, I've put in 2 decades here. It's been real. It's been awesome. But I'm ready to set myself up for the next phase. And that's where that brutally honest, not only self-assessment, but people that you trust. There you go back to networking, like we talked about, Yogi, where somebody can give you a really honest, shove and say, hey man, this is that you've run your course here, and that's okay. And I respect somebody that's raised their hand to serve their country, whether they ended up being, as long as they got out honorably, if they get out after 4 years or they decide to do 30 plus, and that I respect the heck out of that. I really do. And to me, it means nothing. It doesn't matter how long you were in. The fact that you raised your hand, and you see now over the course of my career, but now look how hard it is to get people in the military now. I mean, we're facing some serious,
Yeah.
we've seen what the Army's done, and the Navy to an extent. I mean, you're doing some interesting things with how are you gonna lower standards? Are you gonna cut corners? Is it a throughput? For the last 15 years I was in the Navy, all we talked about was balancing our seashore, our manning at sea. And it was like, well, the most important thing is we want to get to, 98% in the fleet. We didn't get anywhere near it because we had people, even though they were in the military, we had a litany of issues with limited duty and medical issues and family issues. And I mean, I spent a lot of my time on that stuff and leadership roles because that's why and yet, that's the thing. So it's harder and harder to get people in now. What are we selling to them? And having those discussions and being honest and having an honest assessment up front with them and not scaring them away, but also like, and I would talk to my indoctrination classes and I'm like, hey, it must be cool being me, right? I got a parking spot right by the ship and I got my own office and I got this cool badge and oh yeah, I wish that was you, Master Chief. I'm like, you know how long it took me to be here? 25 years. There's people in this indoc that they're not even that old. I've been doing this before, literally, and not to belittle, but literally to point out to them the longevity of it. Like, I've been doing this before you were born. That's how long it takes. This isn't I think that's something that we see culturally where younger people are like, they want everything. They're ready to work for it. They're hard working. They're turning and burning, but they want everything right now. It's got to be fast, and we get underway and the internet was too slow. That was a huge, oh my God, the internet's too slow out at sea. And actually, I'm like, why you look like somebody just stole your cat, man? What's up? Oh, well, the internet, I can't get on Facebook. I'm like, holy cow, things have changed in the fleet for sure. We had carrier pigeons for internet when I first joined, man. Like, so again, hierarchy of needs, there's no ridicule there. It's completely just a different generation. But part of that is having those honest conversations and letting them know this is what it's going to take. Like, yes, you can do that. Yes, you can get a commission. You can do anything you want. You can go fly planes, whatever it is you want to do. But man, that's going to come with an investment in time. And if anything, be candid and be honest about that, because that's hugely important. Not only we're talking specifically a lot about transition, but also entry too, and make sure that they understand coming in, hey, this is a commitment. This is going to take some time. This isn't going to be one of those, those things that's going to just kind of bounce into your lap. It's going to take a lot.
I love how you frame it as an investment of time instead of it's
Mm-hmm.
going to be difficult, it's going to be
Mm-mm.
challenging, all these other things. You're right. Everything is what you invest time into. Everything has a price that you got to pay. Either you pay it now and you have the delayed gratification of being successful later on in life, or you want the gratification now and you push the can down the road, and then you're not able to accomplish whatever you wanted to, or you said that you wanted to in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really good, from my perspective, a really good frame of mind saying that, right? And one of the challenges that I think are, at least the Navy, because we're all Navy, is facing right now is something that you mentioned, the not breaking away from Facebook, not breaking away from that attachment, right? Being chained to that data all the time. If you purge for 30 days, your body will literally thank you and say, hey, I have room in my brain for other things. I'm living here in the present versus I'm living back in home or somewhere else where I have absolutely no control of anything, but I'm trying to control things through a computer hole and I have no idea what the full picture is.
And that was just I love going to sea, especially as a command master chief, because there's a captive audience. I had them trapped, it was easy, and if there was, and I know it sounds funny, but it's like, no, that's the time, like, and I would encourage us, like, hey, what are you guys working on? What are you studying for? What's your next goal? That kind of thing. And part of that, and you kind of touched on it, like how you communicate things. Somebody asked me once, I was a guest speaker at a Chiefs penning, and one of the wives are like, well, what's a command master chief do? I'm like, I'm pretty much a used car salesman. And she kind of looked at me and laughed. I'm like, it's basically what it is, because you have got to sell no matter what it is. You can't walk through the hangar bay mopey ass, having a bad day, taking it out. Well, you shouldn't. I know people do, but that wasn't my model. If you're going to interact with me, it was going to be positive. I was going to be a smart ass. I was going to talk smack. If I knew you were a Raiders fan, God forbid, I would pick on that. I wanted that every interaction to be favorable and positive. But believe me, there was times when I was feeling the exact same thing that a disgruntled sailor was. I'd be like, you know what? I'm with you, man. Like, hey, after, when no one's looking at it, we'll meet in the hangar and we'll rally, man. We'll complain about the Navy, sure. But honestly, it's part of that, and that's a leadership tenet. You have to be able to sell and think about it. I mean, I've been on deployments before where we were heading home and got turned around. I've been pulling into port before where we got turned around for some crazy operational thing that happened on Truman like 3 times on one deployment. We got turned around every time. What are you going to do? Your sailors are bummed. Are you going to join the party and the pity party, or are you going to spin it and motivate it? And that's why I say it's kind of like being a used car salesman, because and a lot of times you're like, I can't believe the shit that's coming out of my mouth right now. So am I actually selling it this way? But they're buying it. So the main line there is to have a positive, have an optimistic uptick on that, but also don't shy away from it. So how you sell it is everything, and that includes yourself, that includes your skill sets, how you present yourself, how you market yourself, but honestly, how you engage in conversation. It goes a long way, for
That's kind
sure.
of hard for our community as well, because typically for the majority of us, we get kind of humble and we don't really want to be out there in front of everybody saying, look at what I can do. But there's a point in time where you need to learn that. Man, you mentioned talking to a first class in your office, and it kind of made me flash back to when I did not select for chief, and I got called into your office for counseling. And we sat down, man, and literally you looked at all my evals. You're like, I don't know why you didn't make chief. Oh yeah, that's because you didn't pass your exam.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
snap.
an important piece, isn't it?
And Nuccio was just like, come on, man. And he's like, man, you didn't pat, like, we batted for you, man. Because I was like, I had a pretty damn good eval for on there. I had a good chance, but hey, man, I made it the next year.
I knew you would too. And we
Yeah.
probably talked about that and probably said, hey, for that, I totally remember that. And that's, again, one of those things that takes, if you take things step by step, okay, so if you want to be chief, and I used to say, that was like the thing I used to throw around in the season all the time. I was like, you volunteered to take the test. You wanted to be here. We didn't make you take the test in January, right? This is all you want. You put in a package, didn't you? Yep. I don't want to hear any complaining then. Shut up. But the line of that was go back to the beginning and hey, don't forget about the test. Don't forget to study. Don't forget to submit a package if you think that, and I've probably, I don't even want to know how many sets of evals I looked at for prospective chiefs or even senior chiefs and master chiefs. But man, I'm like, if you're in doubt at all, it's your life, it's your career. You got to advocate for yourself totally. But again, the first ticket there is I've known a lot of people that are like, oh, I was this and that, and I got the great record. And yep, sure enough, they didn't even make board because of the exam. So that's the first step.
That's the one part that I excelled at. I mean, near
Mhm.
perfect scores every single time. But
Mhm.
after the 6th or 7th year of him being congratulated for that, but not making it,
Yeah.
it means absolutely nothing.
And it's frustrating, man, Mark, I tell you, because you go to do a selection board, you're sworn to kind of keep the integrity of the board process to yourself. So there's briefs that I would do, and I would do it for the first class that were going up. I would do it for second classes. I would do it for people. I mean, I would explain as much as I could, but it's pretty it's pretty restrictive that we don't give you like blunt feedback post board and say this is exactly like sometimes, by the way, it's a lot of times it's numbers and people get wrapped around the axle. Well, I suck, I'm not a good sailor, I've tried, I was this and that, and I'm like, how many quotas did you have? Some of these ratings are ridiculous, like, oh, there's 270 candidates and there was 4 quotas. I'm like, that might be why you didn't make chief. And it doesn't mean, and then part 2 of that is just because you didn't select doesn't mean you weren't worthy to be selected. It just means that 4 other people, and it's an inherently fair process. I mean, a selection board is rigid, it's rigorous, that was probably the hardest 6 weeks of my career that I've ever done because I wanted to get it right. I mean, it's literally all day, every day. And I did an E7 selection board for OS boats and mate quartermasters. It was hard. There's a lot of good sailors in there, but when quartermasters was pretty skimpy for quotas. It was like, well, we have a lot of good candidates here, and then we can only select a few, and it's hard because like I said, we don't give you that direct return feedback like, hey, your record is exceptional, you graded really high, here's some refinement points. Part of me wishes we would do more of that. Now if you have a good leadership chain that can look at your eval, especially people that have sat to selection board, I would always look at evaluations from a selection board perspective instead of my own personal, and I'd know what your job was, I'd have an understanding of it, and I know it was important to you. But you have to be that honest feedback and and it's not easy to go in and sit in front of the command master chief and be told, hey, you didn't, whatever, here's why, or hey, man. And I would always caveat when I looked at evals, I'm like, if you're going to ask me to look at them, I'm going to give you like honest feedback. Like, I'm not going to BS anybody. I don't have any time for that. I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. I'm not saying you're not a good sailor. I am looking at this like we do on a selection board, which is pretty strict. So, I've seen people before. I've pointed out. There's probably 10 or 12 people before that I've looked at evals that I found a glaring issue that ultimately went on to make chief, which is pretty cool. And that has nothing to do about me. It's more about just the process and the fact that we care about our sailors. So it was just easy for me to look at an eval. Saw like one had like a 1.5 year gap in continuity. I'm like, dude, that's an immediate non-select at a selection board. Oh, I thought I had that covered. I thought I had. Okay, well, yeah, you didn't. And as soon as they fix that, look what happened. So that honest feedback is important. And I kind of wish we would do more of that. I really do, because you deserve to know, what else is it that I need to do? Because sometimes it's literally just a matter of there's so many good candidates that score just as high as you did. And there's only X amount of quotas. So, or sometimes there's an obvious thing that pops up.
I almost think that's kind of like a waste of energy the whole entire process without having some kind of way to provide feedback, like
Yeah.
why did that? And I would just
We've
wish.
talked about it a lot too. The Navy has. I mean, there's been, at least within, CMC ranks, I know quite a few. We've had discussions about that, and I always thought that was frustrating because you literally have no idea, because you're like, I can't see what else I can do. You have people, especially when somebody looks at your evals, and the worst thing you want to hear is, I don't know why you're not making it, man.
Yes.
That's frustrating
Yes.
because you're like, well, that's helpful, thanks.
Or whenever somebody gives you that feedback, oh, you're never gonna make it. And then
Right,
they pick it up that same cycle, and you're like,
exactly.
what do you
What do
mean?
I know? Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree, Chris. I think that yeah, I think it is. It's a tough thing. It is because there's they want to protect the process, but then again, you know, um, what are we gonna do with our sailors if we see our sailors don't score well on exam? What do? We literally sit down with their exam and go over all the areas they were really deficient in, and help them with their bibliography and help them with their rate study and find out, do they just suck taking tests, or do they not, how much did they study for, that kind of stuff. We do that for our sailors, but it seems like once we get you at to the E6 and E7 level, we kind of like, oh well, we're going to put some shiny anchors on you and spin you up, and you go out there and figure it out. We need to do, I think, this is Greg speaking, not the former U.S. Navy Master Chief, but we need to do a much better job investing in leadership development and progression from the E7 to E9 levels. Because you'd be amazed how much of my time was spent dealing with chiefs, senior chiefs, and even master chiefs that weren't performing up to speed. So kind of crazy to think about, but it's true. So I think we should invest more in that leadership circle for the Navy should, and certainly think that blunt feedback matters.
And I think that plays a lot, not just for the retention portion of things, but also the progression and also the transition and reassimilation part, right?
Absolutely.
Because if we're creating that almost sense of transparency all the way across the board and having that mentorship and that guidance and everything, one of the things that I've noticed a lot, and with a lot of people that are transitioning out now that we're focusing on that part of our life, right, is that everybody goes into the transition into a dark cloud, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're just navigating through it with, praying for the best, praying that you don't hit, any landmines or
Yeah.
anything, or
Yeah.
any icebergs that might come across. But
Yeah.
you're just literally navigating blind, even with the networks that that come across, even with the people that are giving you guidance. Everyone has such a different and unique transition, right? That we're not able to provide a specific path. It's almost exactly like making chief, right? There's these people that are on the other side that went in transition, and oh well, if this person did it and everything should be okay, you're gonna make it, right? That's what everybody tells you. But the in between, that gap in between is like, well, what do I do? Who do I get feedback from? What am I doing? Am I doing things right? Am I missing things? What's going on? There's tools like Chris already talked about, MYT 365, right? And there's other tools and there's other groups. And then there's the, SEAL Goodwill, all the organizations that are out there to try to help you through the process. But it's so difficult, especially because we're being indoctrinated in not trusting any of them because they have some kind of ulterior motive to try to help
Mm-hmm.
us.
Right. And that goes back. We talked about a little bit ago that the gathering of information, like you need to be a sponge, but then there's a point where you yourself needed to kind of delineate what is going to apply to me, what fits my model, what fits here. I've got all this information and you can go crazy. I mean, transition, I had like resources, all over the place, and this class and do this, and you got to do this and you go to that. And I had to figure out, I'm like, okay, what's the most important piece here? So the more information you have is great, but then you got to be able to parse through it and kind of, individualize it a little bit. Individualize, it's a good word.
And priorities, you're going to have different priorities for everything as well. So it's really hard, man, because there's a lot of things, and Yogi mentioned icebergs, man. And I'm just like, yep, I've definitely in the last 77 days have had plenty of little icebergs floating around. They look tiny, but then they just whack you. And
Well, I mean, it's understated, but it's a culture shock. I mean, again, we were talking about it before we started. Like the going from knowing where I needed to be, I had very limited wardrobe choices. Am I going to wear khaki today or khaki? What am I going to wear today? I knew my socks were provided, my belt was provided, my cover was provided. I knew where to go. I knew what time to be there. I knew how to address people. I knew how to talk to the CO, all blah, 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 all that stuff. You go from that to what in the world? And you the first few days you wake up when you're out, you know, that feeling you have like, oh man, I'm late. supposed to be on the ship. And then you're like, nope, slow down, Joe. You're not going back. So it's still a culture shock. And it's, you've done something and been structured in a certain way to do things for so long that going into that is certainly, and that's where to provide that buffer there, that information collecting, but don't feel compelled like you have to respond and do every single thing they tell you on the way out the door. Kind of what Yogi was talking about, what you guys both hit on. It's like, it's impossible. Like, it's just impossible. You gotta, okay, this is important. For me, it was like, okay, my medical is going to be super important. My DD-214 needs to be squared away. And I want to make sure I know how to do resumes and get that going. So that was the really important stuff for me on the way out.
and there's so many things, and we could probably be here for like ever talking about this. And that's why everybody that's listening, please, if you've made it this far, thank you for listening. And but go download that app. That app is going to help you out if you're going through your transition. Before we go into the saved round and alibis, man, you got anything else you want to throw out there before we go into the last round?
Just really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys. Great thing what you're doing. I listen to your episodes, and I think it's, again, we've talked about resources and network. This is another one. And you know, you start going picking around, there's not a lot of, you want people that are going to be kind of open and honest with you and talk through stuff. And again, you're going to listen to maybe 10 or 12 different episodes of a podcast. One or two of those may really jump out and connect with that individual. So that's super important. What you guys are doing is great. Taking care of people that have served the country and are making that transition. So I think that anybody that listens to these podcasts, whether you're still whether you're in that transition process, or if you're out and you're not finding the doors open the way you wanted them to. Again, resources. And again, if you're running into brick walls, man, you got to change the way you're doing business. You got to reset how you're doing things. So the definition of insanity, we say it a lot, doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting different results. So that's kind of the plug there, is back to that network piece that Yogi asked about. You know, what is a network? And you got to define that really for you, is who do I know and what do they know, which is really important too. And how can I tap into that and use that resource? So
We've had it said before in a previous podcast. Show me your phone book and I'll show you your net worth.
Yeah.
You know, your phone book, the networks, the connections that you made, it's super important.
Absolutely.
And not only is it important for you to reconnect with everybody, but also like genuinely look at your list and be like, man, I haven't talked to this guy in a while. And
yeah,
you'll find that reconnection that you kind of need while you're in this dark time. So
true.
And I'm not saying it's dark, getting it out, man. I'm not trying to make it sound, it's awesome and overwhelming at the same time. So
yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's a dichotomy for sure. And you'll find in a lot of people there's hesitation and a little fear there, but trust me, the Navy will be fine without you. You're not that important. I promise you, no matter what I'm just going to be honest. I see a lot of people that I stay in touch with that still think they're in the Navy and they still think they're all that. You're not. Sorry. The Navies will function fine without you. We appreciate what you did, but you got to let go, man. There's back to the Frozen thing. In honor of my granddaughter, Rosalie, and her Frozen, let it go. But it's okay to be on the other side. Isn't so bad. And you're gonna find it, like in anything, you're gonna find things that you miss. When I got out, I didn't miss the Navy, but I missed the people that were in the Navy. So
yes.
I was getting a little fed up with where the Navy was going and the politics. And now that I see what it's become, it's hard to put a finger on it, but I kind of was dealing with that even 5 years ago when I was on the way out. But one thing that doesn't change is the quality of people, the brotherhood, whether we served together or we just met each other for the first time, like some of us did tonight. That's what you miss. But then again, staying, like you just said, Chris, staying connected. Who have you interacted with? Who's going to reach out for help? I had somebody reach out that I served with about 12 years ago. A couple of weeks ago, he just made chief, and I was like, "What? You made chief? You're the young little boatswain made on my first CMC tour on the Bulkley, just made chief." And said it would be an honor to have a charge in my charge book for you were such a good influence on me. I'm like, holy cow, like that's crazy. Like you just a name that you haven't even seen in years. I remembered him, as soon as I saw his name, he goes, I just got selected for chief. So that's the kind of value of it. That's what you miss the people for sure. That's what kept me coming back. I went in for 4 years, ended up doing 30. 4 years became 30. But it was really the people. I mean, you got to do a lot of cool stuff, a lot of fun, a lot of awesome stuff, and seeing the world, which is all part of it. But being able to spend time with some pretty amazing people and seeing what we're all about when it really comes to time to put the business into play is pretty cool.
So a lot of things that you said rang pretty true. From the way that computers select resumes, like 10,000 per second or whatever they're doing, they're looking for keywords, and networking being so important, man, so sure important.
It is.
One example is, and you may relate to this in my company. If you refer somebody to a position, they sometimes overlook the fact that person may not have a degree in this field, degree at all. But your referral and your networking is what puts that resume in somebody's hands and gives them that human view of it. So have you found anything like that in your company?
Absolutely. Yeah. Got a guy hired a couple of years ago that didn't have a degree, but he was exactly what the company needed for that specific job. And I was able to really and literally, you put in, you get his resume and you kind of speak about what he did in the Navy. And the feedback always from HR was, what do you think about this guy? Like we're relying on you a little bit for the insight here. And that goes back to, again, keep touching on this, but don't burn your bridges and keep that network, because if you're a quality guy and I know you, or I know somebody, and you spend enough time in the Navy, it's crazy. Like I may not know this person directly, but if I float that name out there in my circle, oh yeah, I served with him that's a good dude, man. He knows his stuff inside and out. That's the kind of stuff that pays dividends going forward. So absolutely have seen that, where maybe you don't have the exact skill set, or maybe you don't have a degree, but word of mouth and come in with knowing exactly what they're going to be able to do into that job and being able to transform that Navy skill set into what the company is looking for. That's only going to come from internal reference and recommendations. So Mark, absolutely 100%.
So let's get into the saved rounds and alibis now.
Yeah.
What kind of content do you recommend people to digest while they're in their transition?
That's a great question. It really so what are you? Are you a podcast person? Are you a reader? I read all the time. I do listen to podcasts too. I like both. I think a broad spectrum of, and Chris didn't pay me to say that, so that was on my own right there. A broad spectrum of information gathering, whether it be reading, whether it be lessons learned, whether it be reaching out to other people that have gone through, listening to podcasts, just collect information. The more perspectives you have, and this is a huge problem we have in this country right now with any debate, is we just draw lines on both sides and there's no middle ground, and everybody just loses their stuff, and people aren't willing to move into the other side and learn. So you can learn a lot. You may not be something you align with or necessarily agree with, but people have got there's some great stuff out there for not just military transition. Look for other people that have gone through some pretty incredible, upheavals in life and severe challenges or changes in their life and how they're able to overcome that. There's stuff in there. There's tenets in there. I mean, I was first year, I mentioned it, the first year I got out, I was on oil and gas rigs. I was doing down in Texas initially, and then West Virginia and Pennsylvania, and literally trying to teach standard operating procedures and checklists and safety to a bunch of really smart oil rig guys that had been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. And you can learn a lot. A totally different environment that I had never been around, but I learned a lot from that perspective. So it may not be something that you necessarily recognize or can relate to, but always kind of challenge yourself and keep your brain active. So fantasy football isn't going to keep your brain active. Hate to say it. It's fun. Sorry guys. There's stuff but whether that's reading, whether that's studying, whether that's helping, whether that's serving in the community, do stuff that's going to keep your brain going, and learn. Never be afraid to learn what you don't know. And you do that by gathering information. So anything you can get your hands on that looks good. If somebody posts a book reference or something and it looks like something that's going to be cool to read and learn, or a podcast you may come across, or anything, news. Be careful where you get your news from, of course. Don't just only watch one certain channel. I know for a time on Nimitz there, our strike group commander had Al Jazeera on TV because he wanted to hear what the other, what that side was saying, which there's some merit to that. So try to look for information. Try to always keep yourself learning, and keeping your brain active is really, really important, especially when you get older. So I don't even remember what I had for breakfast this morning. So it's important.
So, a two-part question. What would you tell, if you could go back in time, what would you tell the young version of you before they joined the military? What advice would you give them?
Don't fall in love in the Philippines. Yeah. That's the first thing. No, probably better yet, unlike a buddy of mine on my first ship, don't get married in the Philippines. Interesting for me, I didn't put a whole lot of thought into joining the Navy. I was kind of senior year. I was kind of didn't really want to go to college. Probably could have played baseball, was doing well, did well in school, and had a really good conversation with my dad. And he encouraged me to go give it a try. My older brother, who I always look up to, had already been in the Navy as a gunner's mate, and he was in before me. So he gave me some straight stick advice too. Dad kind of said, "Hey, if you go do 4 years, you'll only be 22 when you get out. You have your college, you'll have some life experience, you'll have a security clearance. You're set up for life. You can do whatever you want." So I didn't put a whole lot of thought into it. Going back now, I probably would have done things a little bit different. I probably would have gone. I love to fly for fun. Been flying for about 25 years. If I had to do it over again, I probably would have gone to school and would have gone to commission and gone into naval aviation. But no regrets. I absolutely love the career that I had. Could have done that multiple times in my career, and by that point, it meant too much to me to be a chief and taking care of sailors and being in that line. I just didn't want to do it. So if I had to do it over again, instead of just jumping in, going to see a recruiter and going for it, and right out of high school, maybe again doing a little bit of legwork and research and understanding what my opportunities were. That'd be the only thing I would have probably done differently. So that's the serious answer to the question. The first one's legit too. Be careful, especially as a young sailor, when you think you know everything. But looking at it and understanding what you're getting yourself into, looking up, and that's important for anybody. If you're brand new in the military, or you have opportunities out there, research it, figure out what it is you want to do and how you can best align your skill set for it.
Second question I got for you is, what advice would you give yourself, and how early before you transition about the transition process?
2 years minimum. 2 years minimum for sure. And I probably started in earnest about a year out. But again, I can actually talk about the degree thing. I mean, I backtracked. I knew how long it was going to take me to get a degree, and I started working on that. I think I started working on my degree in 2015 and got it and finished in 2017. So I had started and stopped many times, typical, had enough credits, but I really buckled down, was taking 2 or 3 classes every semester the last 2 years, and I got it done about 6 months before I retired. So truly that timeline, you look, 2017, 2015, so about 3 years out education wise. So give yourself plenty of time. And Chris hit on it earlier. You go to transition once and then you need to go again, go early and then go back. And sometimes there's updated information, and sometimes they tell you stuff that you need to have in place before you go back. So I think that's pretty important too. Because I waited pretty long in my process. I was inside of a year, I think, before I was about a year out before when I went to transitions, and I only went through one time. So I think 2 to 3 years is pretty beneficial for sure.
And I remember when transition class used to be kind of like an incentive to get people to stay in,
Yeah.
as they would
Scare them. Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
we used to do that before they changed the way that we get out now. I remember the old system. You could pretty much last day be like
Hmm.
stay in,
Yeah.
and I think they really took away that retention getter. How many sailors? I would be curious to see this statistic. How many sailors would have stayed in if they did not change that? I
Hmm.
believe it's actually a
It's an interesting perspective for sure. Because sometimes you hear things that are, you know, and it was I mean, the main reason I stayed in the Navy the first time is at the end of my first enlistment, I got married and my then wife was pregnant with my daughter. And I was scared shitless to get out at 22 years old, not with a kid imminently about to be born. I mean, for me, re-enlisted and at the time getting a pretty decent SRB as an operations specialist was, and the medical piece, and then having that structure of being able to take care of. I mean, that was a huge thing that kept me in, and that's kind of one of those things like you just hit on. Like maybe you're gonna hear something that's gonna catch you and say, oh, maybe I'm not ready to get out. Maybe I'll give this another go. So yeah, that's a good point of, how much do we how early do we do, and then what effect are we really having on that? It's good.
yeah,
It's good
because
perspective
I
for sure.
remember seeing all the time sailors just be like literally they'd be like, oh, I'm just gonna do my 4 years and getting out. Then the last day they are in the career counselor's office signing
Yeah.
that paperwork.
Yeah.
you know,
Reality is really
yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah. We used to send people to the transition tap class, uh, just so that way they would kind of get an idea of like, oh, well, yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
I'm ready to do this, and
Oh, wait, I have to pay for my own health insurance. Oh, wow,
yeah,
really? And I don't have a meal card anymore. What do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? I have to pay for my housing? Really? That's crazy. Yeah, there's things that you may pop up, and sometimes, young, especially the younger generation, and that's just we've all been there, but sometimes you don't have the best laid plans. I remember we had a sailor on Nimitz that we had a discipline issue and we were addressing and talking to, and we asked him, okay, so if this doesn't work out for you, what are you going to do when you get out? And he goes, I'm going to be a professional tennis instructor. I had nothing to say to that. I'm rarely speechless, as Chris can tell you. I was woefully unprepared for that. I was waiting to hear I'm going to go to college. And the other guy was a railroad tycoon. So he was his dad. My dad owns a railroad. I'm just going to go own that. I'm like, why are you in your dad? Wait a minute. Not a lot of people own railroads. Come to find out his dad worked for the railroad. The ground truth came out. But the other dude was like, yeah, I'm going to be a professional tennis instructor. It's what I've always wanted to do. I don't need the Navy. I'm like, all right, you got it. I didn't have anything to offer him at that point. It's like, I don't really have anything for that. So
there's
you,
some
but you don't know what's going to flag. You don't know what's going to pop up when you get informed and you start thinking about it. And your life, it's different when you're 18 and single, or 22 and single, and then 27 and married with children, or 34 or four. Things change and your perspective change. And I could at 20 in the Navy, when I was still getting paid cash out of a briefcase. True story. On the mess decks, the dispersing officer would come out with his gun and his briefcase full of cash. They're like a mafia boss and pay you, whatever it was back then. It wasn't much, but I could care less about health insurance or 401ks or educate. I didn't care about that stuff. It was like I was single, I was in Hawaii, and enough cash to go blow in one night and then borrow a bunch of money from the loan shark E5s the next day to get me through to the next payday. That perspective changes. Well, hopefully it changes for you when you have kids, you get married, and you're older, and you look at things differently. And sometimes you don't get that until you go through transition and you hear all the things that you're going to be responsible for on the outside. So you're right. Potentially that could be in it. It's okay if that scares you straight, or scares you straight back into the reenlistment, and that works too.
what was it that helped you get into the mindset of getting out? What got you into the correct mindset of getting out?
Really I had to force myself. I knew it was time, and that I always had heard from people that I looked up to and respected that you'll know when it's time to go. And I had some opportunities to stick around past 30, but I just didn't. I felt like I literally, people had said, you're just going to wake up one day and you're going to realize your time is up. And that was exactly what it was. It was probably right at about 28 years, 28 and a half. And I loved what I was doing. I still loved, putting a uniform on, but I just knew it was time for something else. And we talked about it earlier in another aspect, but that longevity, man, 30 out of 48 years of my life were spent, wearing a uniform. And you don't think about it when you're doing it, but when you're starting to retire, like, man, that's a lot. I spent way more time in the Navy, you know, for 30 years than I did being on the outside, being 18. I only had 18 years of living as a normal person before the crazy Navy got a hold of me. And then I spent 30 years, so almost twice, approaching twice as much time in the Navy than the outside. And then to go back into that transition, the way to do that was to force myself to just think along those lines and force myself. And that's why I said it was important for me to cut myself out. Like I needed it. I wasn't going to be, I've seen some people that have done it well, and I've seen some people that struggle with it, and people that, and I've been on base before where retirees still want people to call them, well, it's chief to you, it's master chief to you, it's lieutenant to you, and I'm just like, stop, please stop. You're not, because that you didn't learn about leadership. You let it go to your head. You thought you were all that. You didn't humble yourself, and it was important for me. And that was never an issue for me, but it was important for me on the way out to not be the guy that puts 17 Navy retirement stickers on his car the first day and wears. Ironically, I rarely wear a Navy hat, but I figured for you guys I'd wear one tonight. But I've seen people like that are getting giant tattoos, Navy retired, and that's all great. That's not personal. People want to do that. I appreciate, if they appreciate their service that way, that's great. It's just, I'm talking about for me personally, I didn't want to be that. I needed to, because I knew I was going to miss the Navy, and I knew it was going to be a challenge, and I didn't want to cling on, and show up to the VFW every Friday night telling war stories. I had to really kind of compartmentalize myself and prepare so I could do it in my ways, and it worked out for me.
How did it? What did it take for you to find your purpose?
I think trial and error. I honestly didn't know what I wanted to do. I'll admit that I wasn't sure, and I got the opportunity to go do the consulting thing, which was really cool. Super good company, veteran owned, veteran run, all ex-military guys, pilots, special ops guys. Got to meet some amazing guys. The job was super cool. Being able to go see a part of the world I'd never seen as far as industry goes. Never even seen an oil rig up close and personal, or a fracking rig, or trying to learn about that process and be around that. And it's funny too, because you show up and they all think you've been doing it forever because you've got a gray beard and you're older, and you're like, oh, you must have a lot of experience. I'm like, dude, I don't even know what that is. Is that a wrench? I'm like, what do you call that thing? And they're like, oh, you're funny. I'm like, no, I've never even seen an oil rig before. They're like, what? So having that exposure to that, but then being able to learn and go through that was super important too. So you just got to prepare yourself. You got to know you're going into something different. Rarely you're going to do something exactly like you were doing towards in your career, especially if you have a specialized skill set. Like if you're, a lot of nuke guys get out and maybe potentially go work at a reactor, but you may be at a wastewater treatment plant or electrical plant or something. You may be a high school guidance counselor, who knows? And your kids are going, hey, what did you do? Oh, I ran a nuclear reactor. You're late for class. Go. Because you're relying more on your basic leadership skill sets than your technical skill set. A lot of people get out, electronics techs, fire controlmen, they still do stuff very closely oriented. Certainly ITs that have networking and cyber backgrounds, for sure. But honestly, a lot of times the job you're in is not going to be really super close to what you were doing in the Navy. So how you prepare for that is important, for sure.
Greg, we want to thank you for coming onto the show and bringing all this knowledge, all this wisdom, and most of all, the sincerity and transparency, right? I think that's the most important part of anything, is being able to share your experience. And you mentioned it earlier, without, meeting people where they're at. You know what I mean? You have that frankness about you, that persona, and that carries you a long way. You're not that people that are pretentious and people that or don't know where they fall, or try to pretend something to be, just fall in a different place, and you don't want to even listen to them, right? Where with you, I mean, we could literally be here for hours, and continue going. But honestly, from the bottom of our heart, we thank you. We appreciate you. You're always welcome into the podcast, and we would love to have you again and carry
Anytime,
this
man.
conversation forward.
Yeah, we can take a totally different approach next time too. We can talk about, what I think a really great thing of leadership is all the things I screwed up. How about that? That's a thing.
Yeah.
Like that's people don't talk enough about that. And everybody wants to, oh, how's leadership? Everybody's going to talk about, oh, I did all this stuff great. I'll tell you about when I fell flat on my face over and over and over again at all levels, honestly. So I think there's some merit to that, is to have a really open discussion about the fact that you probably, I know for me, learned more from failure than I did from success, which is not easy. It's hard to look in the mirror sometimes and say, man, I'm just not cutting it. But again, being honest with each other, having somebody that can point that out, no matter what position you're at, no matter what company you're in, whether you're active duty or not, you got to have that. I mean, there was times when I told the captain he was a soup sandwich. Like I probably worded it a little bit better than that, but again, the used car salesman came out, but he knew what I was getting at, or I would disagree with the decision. I'd say that's going to blow up in your face, and it would blow up in his face. And he's like, God, I should have listened to you. And I'm like, well, it just doesn't mean I know it all, but I know in this specific instance. But you need to have somebody like that and be able to wear that on your sleeve a little bit and have those discussions. So that's something we can certainly look at down the road, is have a discussion about failure and what we learned from it, because I think it's powerful.
Absolutely. One last question I'd like to ask you is, our audience, if they want to reach out to you and get a hold of you, how can they do that?
Yeah, you have to go through the State Department. No, just kidding. Not one of those stolen valor guys. So you can find me on Facebook, and I dabble a little bit on Instagram, but I also work for a company called VTG Defense that's based in Washington D.C. And so, like I said, still working for the Navy, so you can easily find me out there. Facebook's probably the best way. I keep my profile pretty active. I think Chris reached out on Messenger. I've got my kids on Messenger. I've got my family on there. So I'm pretty responsive on there. It's probably the easiest way to look for me on there. But there's always, of course, there's 37 fake profiles of mine. So make sure if you reach out to me and I ask you for money, that's not my real profile. That's somebody else. I get hit up with all that all the time. Like, oh, I've been talking to you for 6 months. No, you haven't. Sorry. Well, it's your picture. Yes. Welcome to the internet. Pictures are taken. You can steal them. So easiest way is probably Facebook. And then certainly if somebody's looking to get connected, I've got job connections there in the DC area through my company. We're always looking for people. If somebody's transitioned that's interested in working, fantastic company, great benefits, great people. If you can put up with all the Navy nonsense still. I got out, I had brown beard. Look at me now. So yeah, reach out on Facebook. Happy to help you with anything that you need.
Yeah. Hey, thanks again, man, for coming on here.
You bet, brother.
For everyone that's listening, you got Greg. He's got an amazing story. Reach out to him. He's a valuable resource in our community. And to be able to spend enough time, just spend some time with him in the Zoom meeting is amazing. It's an opportunity that I cherish every single time I get to do this. So, guys and gals, brothers and sisters, transition's not an easy thing. It's not rainbows and unicorns, but it's your transition. Take charge of it. Mil2Vet.